Okay, so today we're talking about an old school science fiction classic called Dune. There are a couple of caveats before I get into this one. Number one being, I have watched the movie already and I love the movie, so I was very excited for the book, especially knowing that the movie did not conclude the first book. It really encouraged me to get through the end of the book and complete it because I didn't know what was going to happen by the end of it, which I have a lot to say about. The other thing is, I've consumed a lot of Dune related media, even though I haven't read the original book. I have played the video games, I've played the board games, I've read some of comics, and I have loved all of it. So I already knew a lot about the lore of Dune before coming to the book. But I finally got to the book, and I finally read through it, finished it. It's quite a big book. I did not expect it to be this big, and it's a pretty old one. It's written in 1965, if I'm not mistaken. And to be honest with you, I did not love it as much as I expected I was going to love it. It pains me to say this because this is like I love the lore of this world and this IP, but I'm not a fan of the writing style here at all. I mean, if I was somebody who was coming into this with absolutely no reference to what Dune is, what it looks like, what the world is, what are the different factions, if I had none of that idea, if I didn't have the visuals in my mind, I don't know how I would even imagine a lot of the situations in this book looking like. There's the first 200 pages, the writer just drops on you 100 different terms, and you're expected to be like, okay, he just said that word. I have no idea what that word means. Even by the end of this book, there were some words I still had no idea what it meant. And this is particularly weird because I happen to be an Arabic speaker. Arabic is my second language. It's the second language I learned in school when I was a kid growing up. So you would, and that's another thing nobody ever talks about this book, which is this book from first page till the end page is completely inspired by Middle Eastern, Arabic, Islamic cultures and traditions. All of it. Like, there's so many words. I used to stop and I was like, wait a minute, I know what that word means because I speak the language. So that was a slight, even though I love to see books that do that, I love to see books that are not just another cliche, oh, it's Europeans in space or something, you know what I mean? No, it's not cliche, it's taking on a familiar culture from Earth and it's shooting it into the future and seeing how things look there in the future with that culture as a reference, as a base, which is great. But a lot of those words were not, this is a very weird nitpick. A lot of those words were not used as it is used in real life. Now, you probably are saying it's a science fiction, but come on, get over it. The meaning of the word this and that is not going to be the same 10,000 years into the future, but it is annoying being somebody who knows the actual language and just stopping in the middle of the book and be like, that's not what that word means. You're saying it completely incorrect. But at the same time, it was a bit fun because I got to read some of these words and be like, hey, I know what that means, or I know what they're trying to reference. And I feel like it gave me a much deeper appreciation of this book. If I didn't know it, I don't know, if I didn't speak that language, I don't know if I would have picked up on all of that stuff, all of the references it's trying to make. That said, I'm not the biggest fan of how this is written, and mainly because I'm going to make a lot of comparisons to the movie. I apologize, but I cannot get the movie out of my head. I really enjoyed the movie. And for example, that part where the Harkonnens are doing their invasion on Arrakis, trying to assassinate the Duke Leto and his family. In the movie, you get to actually see the action sequences. You get to see invasions. You get to see all of the cool stuff that happens, the fighting, the combat. And here, all that happens is the Harkonnen Baron literally just walks into the room and he's like, okay, now this is my place now. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And many moments where you think there's actual combat that's supposed to happen, there's actual fighting supposed to happen, different factions colliding. None of that happens. Everything is in speech. You know what I mean? Everything is in like spoken terms. Now, Game of Thrones has this to a way smaller extent, but it's almost like the worst parts of Game of Thrones is like a book in its entirety, because this book, all of it is pretty much people just talking philosophy back and forward, right? And then there's a lot of things that I can already see that it's going to happen in the other books, which is there's a lot of mutations, people changing their physical biology and turning into something else, and which is, it makes sense because the way I understand it, the writer was very aware or very interested in exploring the ideas of and themes of how people are shaped within the environment that they are living in. So it makes sense that the Fremen are very different than everybody else, all the other humanoid cultures. It makes sense that the space guilds are not really humanoids anymore. They're mutated into something else. They look very freakish, they're very weird, but they have to do it in order to be efficient at their task. And the Harkonnens, which is the only faction that I feel like doesn't make any sense. They're just like extremely brutal and industrial and all of those things. So maybe the only thing that makes sense about the Harkonnens is that the Baron is like fat and lazy and all of that stuff. It makes sense because they're more industrial. They count on workers and slaves to do all of the stuff for them while they sit on their asses all day, right? So it makes sense they might not be fit. But beside that, their entire planet doesn't make sense. Entire planets in this book don't make sense to me. You know, when they're speaking terms and they're speaking numbers, the numbers are like, for example, I'm sending a fleet of what were they called? Sardaukars, right? And then it gives a number, and then you're like, how is that a fleet? That number is way too small. When you're talking about an intergalactic empire that has enveloped entire planets, and there's like so many houses, you expect billions of billions, probably a trillion population society. But then the numbers that are given out in this book are ridiculous. You're like, how? This is not as big as I expected it to be. Which is another thing. Like there were also so many other things that just didn't make sense to me. For example, the Emperor, like by the end of the book, the Emperor just like decides, hey, you know what, I'm just going to abandon the most important position in the galaxy and go to this desert planet in order to confront this one random guy in the desert that we tried to kill but didn't quite die. You're like, what? None of this makes sense. and then we get to another reason why I didn't like this book is the protagonist is just not an interesting person. The protagonist, he's kind of boring, to be honest with you. And by the end of the book, he acts more of a dick than anything else. And it makes sense because of the world is harsh and brutal and cruel and all of that stuff. But this is just not a likable protagonist. I mean, this is not somebody who I want to see become the Emperor, which is... it really doesn't show you consequences. For example, okay, I get it, the House Atreides are being attacked on Arrakis, whatever, they're being assassinated, sure. But how does Caladan respond? How does an entire planet where the Atreides come from, how does it respond? How do, like, at nowhere, years pass through the story, and you have the family of the Duke in the desert, right, still surviving, and then people from Caladan are just like, they're nowhere to be found. They're nowhere to be heard from. What's happening over there? And just so many plot holes, and I can go deeper and deeper and nitpick more, but I'm not going to. It's because at the end of the day, the lore, the world building is much more interesting than what this book is. As much as I love the lore and the world building and I want to explore it even deeper, this first book is not the best. It's not bad, Okay, I'm gonna give it a 3.5, close to 4, but we're really at 3.5 here. And I hope the following books rectify that, makes it a bit more interesting, because this book is just people raging about philosophy, almost all of it. It was pretty boring, especially the first 200 pages are extremely boring because it's all politics. And then when some of the actiony stuff starts happening, then that's really after 200 pages. So like that's a lot of commitment. And I don't know if the other books are going to be this large. I don't know if I want to continue with the series. I might watch a bunch of YouTube videos that are like wrap-ups of each book, so I can just get an idea where the series is going. I don't know if the second and third, whatever, how many books get better. If they do, let me know, because I would like to continue it since the lore is just so good. It's so interesting. So that's that. I ranted a lot about this book. It was a bit of a harder book to finish, but given the fact that I've seen the movie, I did not get a resolution from the movie. There was still the ending to come. Therefore, it really encouraged me to get through the book. And oddly enough, the movie helped this time around, where versus when I watched Game of Thrones and I tried to read the books, I had a harder time because I knew exactly what was going to happen in each book for each that corresponded to a season, right? Well, that's that. Thank you for taking your time and joining me here today. Have a good one. Bye bye.